Don't look at it, dude, really. I'll rip it down before you come over. The bottom of the Han is really bad. All right, let's do a Q&A. And the way I run these is I'm going to run them by section. So I'll take a few questions from the sitting crowd, and then we'll do the standing crowd, and then we'll do this standing crowd. Does that make sense? That way you don't have to raise your hand every time when I'm only calling on this group. So what do you guys want to know sitting down? You're the guys that have heard me 50 times. You're like, I just went down.
When writing, how do you work out space versus time?
Space versus time. What do you mean? Can you speak a little more on that?
So I guess distance more versus time. So you have your map and you're writing. Is it more of just kind of feel how the story goes, or is it I know this amount of space is going to take these characters 4 months?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, so how do you work with if you've got traveling characters? Working out how much time things are going to take, traveling, and things like this in a book. It actually really depends on the plot archetype of the book. If the book is what we call a travel log, which is about traveling to new places, exploring new locations, it's kind of got that adventuresome exploration feel to it, then the destinations you go to are the main part of the plot. For most of the books I'm writing, I don't do travel logs very often. I've done a few, but not very often. So for me, that stuff in the middle is the boring stuff, and I skip it. And usually you'll see in my books, they start in one chapter, they're like, well, we got to get here. And the next chapter, wow, that was a ride. And then we're there. And that's because the plot archetype I'm working on is usually different than that. So you got to kind of understand, with your writing, one of the big things to figure out about your story, either discovering it as you write or when you're planning it, however you do it, why are people turning the pages? What are the promises I'm fulfilling, and what is the thing that they're going to read that book to get? They can be multiple things, but if that exploration is part of it, they don't want to miss that journey. I remember reading a book once, and this is kind of an example of why this is so important. And I'm not going to name who it is, because he's a very good writer. But there's one of his books where he stops, takes a break, comes back to the characters a few years later, in the middle of the story, and you've missed the main character falling in love and getting married and this stuff. And I was like, no! Because the book is a coming-of-age book. And so the coming-of-age book, skipping, falling in love, really felt like a betrayal of my trust as the reader. There are other books I've read where you can skip that, and it's okay. Does that make sense? Because the book is not about that. It can be about something else. So make sure you're not skipping the stuff that people want to read. Make sure you skip the other stuff, though. All right. What else do we got right here?
So I've got a witless question about Boyd.
Uh-oh.
Knowing that he is a world jumper,
Yes.
he's been in quite a few of your books.
He has.
Do you have any plans, or is it possible that he may wind up jumping realities and/or universes as you write more books that are outside the Cosmere, or do you plan on just kind of having him?
Good question. So the question is, am I going to have Hoyd, who has appeared in many of my books, jump between universes as I write more books outside the Cosmere? The answer is actually no. I have a distinct story that I'm telling in the Cosmere, and it's less about the fun of connecting all my works, which is fun, but it's less about that and more about the actual story. Part of the reason I'm doing this whole thing with Hoyd is I like the idea of playing with the idea of what is an epic, and an epic that spans many years is really cool to me, and so I have hidden that among my books that it will eventually come out in a much more direct way. I actually had to make this choice pretty early in my career when I was writing the Rhythmatist was the first one. There was, the Alcatraz books are just goofy and zany, so I didn't have to think about as much of those. But with Rhythmatist, I'm like, what am I gonna do with this? Because it had originally been planned as a Cosmere book, and then I decided I wanted to set it on Earth, and I didn't want to do a lot of these sorts of political things on Earth in the Cosmere. I wanted it to be a far off and distant place, and that's when I made the break. I said, no, I'm not going to put him in this. And that made it easy when people were like, hey, you going to sneak him into the Wheel of Time? I'm like, no, it doesn't belong there. That's not how that goes. A lot of people were expecting me to sneak him in somewhere. All right, right here.
Do you find yourself impatient, having to wait to reveal some of those things?
Do I find myself impatient, waiting to have to reveal some of them? Yeah. It's.
You start changing your mind and working on that idea more.
Yeah, I do. There are ideas I'm like, oh yeah, this book is going to be so cool. I'm going to work on that, and then I have to be like, all right, You can work on that while you're excited on it, but do realize it's like 10 years away, and things like that. And so these outlines, I'm very excited, but you know what? I'm used to it. I started writing Dalinar's story when I was 15, and people didn't get to read Dalinar's story until I was, what, like 35, 37, something like that? I don't know. So I was 35, I think. So I waited 20 years for Dalinar, so I can wait a little bit longer on some of these other things. All right, let's do one more in the center here if anyone has one. All right, let's go to the standing up crowd. We're going to break it. Yeah, we're not going to do this group, but all right, we'll go right here.
You were saying that you were in the Middle East. Was it actually in English, or were they reading it in Arabic?
Oh, good question. Were they reading it in English or Arabic? They were reading in English. They were reading the UK editions. So I don't know that I have. Well, I know I have my books in Turkish, but I don't think there are any actually in Arabic. There's some sister languages, but not Arabic itself. All right.
When you write a book and you write a character who's better at something than you are, like Shalon is very good at drawing, or Wayne is very good at imitating voices, how do you write that?
Yeah, this is a good question. You get this old adage in writing classes where people are like, write what you know. And you're like, but, you know, writing about English professors gets a little old unless you're writing literary fiction, and that's like half of it. What do you do when you want to write somebody who's better at something than you are, right? Excellent question. Couple things. You can construct the perfect situation to show off what you want to show off, which is not how life normally goes. So I am not nearly as clever as some of my characters, but I can construct the situation and then take like 2 hours thinking, all right, what's the perfect comeback? Right? Go get a burger and the perfect comeback. You know how you might do where you're like, oh, if only I thought of that. Well, you can make that happen. The other thing you can do is good research. And for a lot of the things where it's a skill that I don't have, what I try to do is I try to do enough research to get myself like 70% of the way there as an expert, right? And you can do that pretty fast. You take a couple months, read a couple of books, and you can get yourself to the point that you don't sound embarrassing. Then you write the scenes and you find someone who is an expert, because that last like 30% is what takes like 9 years extra. And you give it to them, you say, where am I wrong? And since you've kind of done enough work that you're not just, you know, completely out in left field, they can fix it usually. And they're like, oh yeah, this is not something, you know, that a doctor would say. This is not something you do. You fix it right here, but you got these parts all right. It's the context is correct, and that's what you want to do if you can. All right. Forums are very useful in the internet age. You can go hang out, you know, lurk around people talking about all kinds of things. You can be like, how do these people think? How do people who think this way think? And you can go there and get from their own mouths, their own voices, a lot of how they're talking and thinking and what they're passionate about and things like that, and then you try to represent that the way they would represent it if they were writing the book. All right, right here.
I was wondering, do you ever plan on writing something akin to the Silmarillion for the Cosmere?
Do I ever plan to write something like the Silmarillion for the Cosmere? No, I have no specific plans right now. I've read the Silmarillion. Wow, he was a genius, but that's where you get into like the mad genius type stuff, right? And it's just, yeah, I have no plans right now to do that. But maybe you know, you get me when I'm, you know, 70 and I'm like, I must write my own Isaiah. I will do it. Something like that. All right, other questions in the orange.
How many scripts did you write and submit before you got a launchers picked up?
Oh, how many scripts did I write and send out before I got a launchers picked up? So novel-length things, launchers was my 6th. Okay. It sold while I was writing my 13th, which was The Way of Kings. You shouldn't have to do that. I was really bad when I started. The other thing is I was not good at revising, and I sometimes wouldn't even send books out because I'm like, oh, I can learn to do that better. I'll just write another book. Which was the wrong attitude to have, but it worked. It ended up working out for me, so I don't know if I'd change anything. But I did collect some rejections, but really, my first 5 books were very experimental. Someone told me your first 5 books are generally terrible, which is not necessarily true, but it was the right advice for me. I sat down and I wrote 5. Like, my first one was an epic fantasy, because I was pretty sure that's what I love. But my second one was a space opera. My third one was a sequel to that epic fantasy. And then my fourth one was a comedy, like a Bob Aspirin style like fantasy farce. And then there was a cyberpunk. And then there was Elantris. Like, I wrote those 5. Then after those 5, I sat down and said, okay, epic fantasy is what I love. I'm going to kind of go with that. That's when the idea of the Cosmere started going for me. And I sat down and I wrote Elantris, a book called Dragonsteel, which is kind of Hoyd's origin story, and a book called White Sand, which we're currently making into a graphic novel. And those 3 books, I got the best feedback on as I was submitting them. And that's where I really started to push it. And getting published. So you can imagine that what I did is I practiced for a while, I wrote a book that I felt was pretty good, and during the 3 years it took to sell that, I ended up writing some more, because I do that. Alright, other questions? Gentleman in the glasses.
Yeah, so after reading your entire bookology, I don't even know the word.
Bookology, I like that.
It got to a point where I was running out of books, so I went on your website and found your recommended read. And after talking to some other authors, I found some other connections to you, Dave McFarlane, for example, Brian McClellan. Is there anybody else that you would recommend down the same path?
Okay. Authors I would recommend. I'm going to go in a couple of different directions, because not everyone may like the same sorts of things. I'm going to tell you what I've been reading lately. Brian McClellan's very good, and Brian McClellan was one of my students, but I can't really take credit for Brian because he was really good when he came to class in the first place. And Brian's books, if you haven't read them, Promise of Blood is the start. They are flintlock fantasies, and they kind of combine a little bit of hard fantasy magic like I do, and a little bit of the kind of grimdark grittiness, and kind of combine them together into kind of this cool mix, so that the magic isn't quite as hard as the magic I do, meaning quite as rule-based, but the grimdark isn't quite as grim as the grimdark tends to go, and the mix works really well. I read Naomi Novik's new book, Uprooted, which is really good if you haven't read it. It's kind of like a dark fairy tale YA, but really twisted. Like, so it's not intended for a teen audience because it is pretty twisted, but it's like how the fairy tales really were. It's that sort of thing. It's very cool. It's very well written. Let's see. I'm currently reading Dan's new book. That's not out yet. But I'm not a serial killer. If you haven't read Dan's books, they are great and they are creepy. It's about a teenage sociopath who hunts demons to kind of get that whole I'm a sociopath and kind of want to kill people. Not that all sociopaths want to, but he does. And same thing out of the system is, go kill demons. And let's see, what else have I really loved? I like Robin Hobb's books a lot. If you haven't read Robin Hobb, Brent Weeks, very similar writer to me. Brent Weeks, The Black Prism. It seems like Brent and I must have read the same books, a lot of them growing up, and kind of had the same, because we both kind of independently started doing this kind of epic fantasy, rule-based, wacky magic system thing right about the same time. I really, really like N.K. Jemisin, Nora Jameson. Her books are very literary. So if you're not on the literary side of fantasy, but her new one is fantastic. It's written in second person, at least one of the viewpoints is. And it's like the only book I've ever read in second person that works. And some of my classic favorites, A Fire Upon the Deep by Werner Vinge, is very Dune-like in that it's like a science fiction that blends the best parts of epic fantasy together with it. And if you haven't read that and you like Dune, you'll probably like A Fire Upon the Deep. There we go. All right, right here.
Is there any more information on the efforts to go to like the movies?
Oh, movie stuff. Okay, let me.
Or television, or maybe even animated.
It's television and things like this. So, for those who don't know, what we do with Hollywood is they come and they option our books, right? This is where they give us some money not to sell the books to anyone else, while they try to get things together to make a film. And most of the time, it doesn't pan out. Sometimes it does. But, making a film takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of time, so they want to make sure that they've kind of got the rights locked up while they do that. So it's basically like renting the rights, but it's a rent-to-own, because eventually they have a buyout price they have to pay, but all their rental payments kind of apply to that. And I have had things for options since 2006, I think, and nothing's ever gotten made. And right now I have under option, I have Mistborn, I have Emperor's Soul, I have Stormlight, I have Steelheart, and Legion just lapsed. So somebody wants that, let me know. And all of those are in various stages of production. I've chosen production companies that I feel good about. And so I feel good about all of them, but I don't know what their chances are, right? Most recent one was Steelheart with Sean Levy's company. He did Real Steel. That's what convinced me. It's a Richard Matheson story that he adapted. He also did the Night at Museum films. And they've been really cool. They've invited me in. I got a tour of Fox Studios, and they're working on a screenplay. I'm hoping that'll turn out well, but I have really no power to make Hollywood do stuff. Nobody really does, even the people there. I think they're all kind of confused by how it sometimes works out. So I would do animated if the right project came along and someone offered me and I thought it looked good. I'm not opposed to that. I'm not opposed to TV, but we just have to see who comes to me and when we go out, who listens. Yeah. So in the back, right, way back there, yeah. Yes?
Okay, so there's a popular theory on the internet that Brandon Sanderson is actually a robot or a collection of I've never heard you actually dispute this.
Right. Well, the thing is, the way we were programmed doesn't let us lie. And so this is a problem for disputing it. So I'll just say no comment.
The fight scenes in the Mistborn novels are incredibly visual. How do you write that? Do you have to diagram it out?
Right. How do I write the visual fight scenes from something like Mistborn? Actually, if you do a lot of research by watching Jackie Chan films. But really what you're doing is actually, at least the way I approach it, you could do it whatever works for you, but the way I do is I actually approach what I want the emotional and mental beats to be in the scene, and I build the scene around that. What is someone going to realize? What is someone going to feel? What is someone going to connect? How are they going to bring these things together? And then I use those to construct the scene so that even if someone is not following it or is not as interested in the action, they will get the emotional parts and have these like focuses for themselves. And I just construct the action around that. And often in a first draft, it's actually pretty rough. One of the biggest things I have to do in second drafts and third drafts is fix the blocking for these battle sequences, which is where everyone's moving, because I'm working on the emotional beats first. And I feel like that's the way to go for me. I can construct a really awesome looking fight scene, but the problem is you can't do a Jackie Chan thing like in a book. It's like, he punched him really fast. This other person punched her twice as fast, but then she kicked him twice. I mean, it's just boring, right? And even the blow-by-blows, when they get exciting, kind of feel boring sometimes, but if you've got those emotional and mental things connecting and pulling the reader through the story, then it's gonna work better. All right? The young person right here.
Why did it take you so long to write the 5th Alcatraz?
Why did it take me so long to write the 5th Alcatraz book? And he came in costume. This is so awesome. Well done. Woo! I'm going to give you a pin. This is from the older books. I don't have an Alcatraz one. This is from Stormlight, one of the Stormlight pins. Thank you for coming in costume. So, the Alcatraz books. The problem was, I had this like weird relationship with Scholastic, who was publishing them, where they didn't want to keep publishing them, but they didn't want to sell them back to me either. It was really weird, because we're like, if you don't want to keep publishing them, why not just let us take them back and sell them to someone else? And they're like, so we had to convince them to sell them back to me, and I actually had to pay them a bunch of money to get their rights back, to bring them to another publisher, and that deal required that we couldn't sell any Alcatraz books until January of this upcoming year. Mm-hmm. And so the reason I couldn't do the 5th book is because of that contract. Let them sell off the remaining books that they had, so that we're re-releasing them starting in January, the first 4 again, and then the 5th one. We didn't want to do the 5th one until the first 4 could come out so people could buy them. So that's the reason. All right, we're going to go sitting down right here. Oh, no spoilers, no spoilers.
No spoilers.
No spoilers.
Sorry guys, it's been out for a while. You should just buy it and read it. Sorry. Is there a way, like, for instance, Adeline has his sword and he
Right. Why don't you ask this one when you come up to talk to me? Because I think it's just going to get too spoilery for people. So let's go right over here, right here.
In the Storyline Archive, damnation is a physical planet or place, to my understanding. Is the Tranquiline Halls seems a little less tangible. Is it a physical place, and will we see?
So, damnation and the Tranquiline Halls, are they physical places? In Rosharan mythology, they are places much like heaven and hell are places. Tranquiline Halls is, and so they believe that they do exist, but they're not sure if they exist on this plane or the next plane or things like that. And that's all I'm going to say on it.
I have a question on when you come up with terminology. Because you use a lot of regular terms. If you read Warbreaker, Breath specifically. So as a working writer, before ever reading a Brandon Sanderson novel, I might have come up with the breath myself.
That's good.
So the question being, have you ever had that where you were working on something and then read another book and found they were using either a similar term or something?
Yeah, it's happened a bunch. I've ever been working on a book and found someone else used a similar term. Janny Wirtz wrote a book about someone called the Mist Wraith. There is a book called like The Curse of the Dark Eyes, or something like that. It's hard to do something where someone hasn't used any of the terms before, like trying to do the Steelheart books, which use superhero mythology, like trying to find a name for any superhero that DC or Marvel haven't had. It's like basically impossible. So I had to be like, all right, ones that no one has heard of that only appeared for one issue. If I come up with a cool name and they've used it once in like one issue, I can still use it. You just have to not let that get to you. Make the story your own through good writing and good storytelling, and no one's going to look at it and be like, oh, this is a ripoff. And if all your beta readers say, oh, this is a ripoff, then maybe you change it, but they probably won't. That's my advice to you. Don't stress that one too much. Work on making your story great, and don't worry too much if it is what someone else has done. All right, we're gonna end with the dude in the back and the glasses, because you keep, yeah.
Are there any actors that you would really love to see in an adaptation of your work?
Wow, excellent. Are there any actors I would love to see in an adaptation of my work? Wow. You know, you toy with this in your head, but I usually only do it after I've written the book. And then it's kind of hard because I'm like, this actor is like, this character is the person in my head, not a specific actor. But we've had to start doing where people come when they're making the films like, who do you see maybe in this role or something like this. And so I have come up with some of these things. For instance, the guys who have Emperor or have Mistborn keep talking about Sazed, and they're like, they kind of want to go Asian with Sazed, which I think would work just fine for the terrorists, and they keep using Chow Yun-Fat as someone that they look at, which would be pretty cool. Legion I wrote with a few actors in mind. One of the few books I've done that. So if you've read that, I actually cast Ivy, JC, and Tobias as 3 actors I like. And you should read and see if you can figure out who those are, because I've said online, and you can read it and be like, I wonder. And then you just Google it online; they'll all be there. One of them's from Firefly, so yeah. I'll give you a hint. This character's initials have been the same in like 5 or 6 different movies, and they're the same initials I use for the character. And this actor keeps playing characters with the same initials. And so I use those initials. But for the most part, I don't really think on this too much, because you spend a lot of time thinking out, like when we first were casting, or someone first bought Mistborn, I'm like, ooh, who do we get to play then? And now all those actors, they're all like 10 years older than being able to play Vin now. So it's like, what was the point of doing all that? So I'm gonna let something like get to actually casting, and then hopefully they'll invite me in and I can give my feedback. All right, so we're gonna go